a second. First thing, we'll probably take up the majority of this meeting. We'll be talking about the economic development chapter, and Rich Shine has made some edits regarding his preferences with this chapter. We talk about that, and then if we have time, we'll get into the housing chapter and then future dates. But at this time, I'll turn it over to our planning administrator, Steve Hunter.
No, I think you hit on the goal here. Is I think this is the second or third meeting we're coming back together to talk about the EDA chapter that was prepared by the Economic Development Authority, and then we got the draft. And there was some general discussion about some of the recommendations, some of the direction of the chapter, and then one of our planning commissioners went into some detail and did some markups, and those were sent out to the group for y'all to review. We've had to cancel a couple meetings due to some other situations. And I think the goal is to get back here and talk through these changes and try to get this chapter in a place everyone's comfortable with, get some consensus, and then once this chapter's done, we just sort of put it in the folder and we get into chapters 2, 3, and 4. And then at some point we'd be going out on the road and presenting these to the public. So nothing's finished ever really until, this is just a draft. Then it would go out to the public for comments, and it would come back to this committee. And then ultimately there would be a public hearing someday, and the planning commission would either ratify a chapter or not. And that's where we're at. So I'll just stop there and maybe turn it over to Commissioner Shine. Maybe you want to start with your comments and then just.
So
Our live stream, by the way, guys.
yeah, so what do I want to say about this in short version? So when we got this and I looked at it, I got a sense, I could tell, I got a sense that the people who put it together were a little, I'm just going to say upset in some ways. And I want to go on record in saying my editing here has nothing to do with the quality of this report. I think the quality of this report is absolutely first rate. I think the factual stuff is good, and you'll see that the body of this thing, I've made absolutely no changes. I think we should just drop it in the comp plan. It's really well done. What I took some exception to was some of the introduction and some of the conclusions. In there, it looks to me, the document looked to me like a really good policy statement to stand on the front page of an EDA website, but the EDA website doesn't necessarily 100% match what the comprehensive plan is about. And what I mostly saw were some things where the document was asking us to do things which don't really belong in this part of the document. And in fact, almost everything that they asked for is already stated in the goals and objectives, which is where most of these things live. They don't live in this document. The reason I'm going a little bit slowly is because I think the document I gave you, and I didn't bring my original document, the document I gave you had, maybe you didn't see them, in addition to track changes, had comments for every single change. I don't know if people got that or as
they did not.
Because, and in each one of these cases, I didn't just make changes, I justified why those changes are there. And I don't have it in front of me, I'm sorry, I thought maybe it would be here, and I'm not connected. But with my recollection, they were mostly things like, there's a paragraph that encouraged us to plan. Well, this is a planning document. That's what we do. It's in the goals and objectives. We don't need to have a statement about a whole paragraph in here about the need to plan for economic development in this chapter. It's already up front. It's already implied in the fact of this document. So there were a number of things like that. There are other things that I think were recommendations that we'd not made yet made as a planning commission, and it's fine for the EDA to make those recommendations to us, but I'm not willing to wholesale accept the number that EDA wants to give us. We need to have that conversation before we accept those kinds of things in a document. So that's my shorthand version. Short, summary, fantastic document, really pleased that they did this. We should have done this kind of thing years ago. These people know what the county has and what the county needs. I think, did Allison Davis have a hand in some of this as well? I can't remember. No, this is
the housing.
The housing stuff. Sorry, I'm confused the two. All I've really done is try to streamline the beginning and the end to better meet the needs of our comprehensive plan.
So just to clarify, you have struck out all the recommendations the 4
Yes.
recommendations. And
But,
can-
let me say, okay, go ahead, sorry.
Well, But what you're saying is that having recommendations are not appropriate in this chapter, and that they are in the goals and objectives, or that
Yes.
they are not in the goals and objectives, but they're just not appropriate?
They're in the goal, most of the things that are in here are in the, so what I did is I struck it, and what's in red is what I've added. So you'll see at the beginning
Yeah,
and conclusion, I've added a paragraph, and I feel like that paragraph covers most of what's taking place
The
in here.
conclusion paragraph.
Yeah, yeah. Without committing us to specific recommendations, which I'm not sure are the planning commission's recommendations, I think they're the EDA's recommendations, and they're not always the same thing. And I'm not making a judgment either way, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there.
A couple of things. Oh, thank you. A couple of things. Not only the quality that this chapter was put together, that's to be commended. I didn't have any significant issues with the content. And as far as acreage, and I think Mr. Hunter pointed this out before, I think in previous plans we've had acreage out there. However, the 350 acres, some people were not comfortable with that. I get it. So, page 18 of 20 of the report, I'm okay with everything in this chapter. But if you go to page 18 to help placate or satisfy the concern that we don't need a specific acreage, the 350 acreage appeared to be a sticking point for some people. So on page 18, instead of 350, if it said significant acreage, because I do think we're going to have some industrial development going forward, I'm okay with the chapter as it was before the edits. That's my personal preference on that. But I think it was very well put together. So that's where I stand.
So you don't necessarily think it needed to be edited at the beginning?
No.
Okay.
And I know there were some current concerns about the number 350, and I get it. And we don't know what the next 5 years, 10 years, let alone will bring. So I'm okay with it, but instead of 350, if it said significant acreage for future industrial development. And I would add another thing on that. You know, Midway's had very substantial growth with the industrial complex there. Versailles doesn't have an interstate running through it, so we're, not that we're off the beaten path, but we don't have some of the advantage of 64 running right through our city or right next to our city. I know we have the Parkway. So going forward, I think we will have to develop significant acreage for industrial development. But I'm okay with not having 350 in there, because that seems to be a concern throughout the community with some people, some of our leaders, and some of our citizens.
Can I just add to that? My objection to putting the number in there has nothing to do necessarily with 350. You guys might want 600, but in a way, to say that this is really the need to identify suitable land for economic development actually opens it up more than pinning it down to a particular number at this point.
But it does say minimum of 350, but.
So the 350 acres are mentioned in the recommendations. So you want the recommendations in there?
No, I mean, I as a personal preference, I do not have a problem with the 350, but I'm willing, before it goes to the meetings where the public's engaged, if we substituted a minimum of 350 with significant acreage, more, I won't say vague, but more open-ended language, that would be my preference.
But you want to keep the recommendations in the document?
Yes.
And there it is. And so we got to get a consensus here somehow and think through this chapter. And again, the 5 planning commissioners, you guys are the comp plan subcommittee, and then the 3 elected officials are on here, kind of like ex officio to some degree on the steering committee. But, how you guys somehow give the staff some direction that this is the chapter, this is where we're landing. we would have to talk through how you guys actually take an action, but at this point, we're just trying to get the wording where everyone's comfortable with. And also recognizing the EDA folks did a lot of heavy lifting here, but at the end of the day, this committee has to make a decision what all these chapters say. Down the road, we may have a housing chapter that an outside group does, and you all eventually have to say, this is what we want in our document as far as a new chapter.
Steve, from a procedural standpoint, remind me, could we go out to the public and have the meetings with multiple chapters, like the EDA chapter as well as the housing chapter, or were we going to break that down separately? Or maybe we didn't have
The plan was to probably put together several chapters and go out and do maybe everything but land use, let's say, and save that for its own standalone meeting. But, chapters 2, 3, and 4 are pretty basic. This one, and we're talking about a housing chapter. I could see us having all these kind of in the can to some degree, and then we go out and have this kind of presentation to the public, get feedback, and then we come back and see if we have to make edits. But we can do them one chapter at a time, or we can do a few at a time. What we probably wouldn't do is take two versions of the EDA chapter out and say, which version do you all prefer?
So procedurally, we need a consensus to go forward with this before we go to housing.
Yeah, and we really haven't talked about 2, 3, and 4. You guys have seen drafts; they're done, but we really haven't sat down and walked through them in any detail, or got a consensus that 2 is ready to go as written, for example.
Chad, I'm a little bit confused. In the conclusion that Rich has proposed, it says this includes the requirement to realize the need to identify suitable land for economic development. So what you're saying is that's not good enough for you? You want something to more specifically to say sufficient land, or?
Let me get back to the end of the document. And I was focused on page 18.
Go up.
Okay, my pages aren't numbered. Where are you?
Yeah, that's 18.
That is 18.
Rich's
That is
version didn't have page numbers on it, so we don't have those on there. But it's recommendation number 3. Recommendation number 3 is the one that has the specific acre
See, he
allocation
has
on it.
struck all that already.
Yeah.
So in the red conclusion, thank you. In the red, where he has stated conclusion, I don't know if it shows up red on your computer.
It does.
It says, this includes the requirement to realize the need to identify suitable land for economic development.
Yeah, I don't have a problem per se with the conclusion, but the things that are striking, and I know Rich had brought this up in our last meeting. He did not seem comfortable with a lot, and I don't want to put words in your mouth. The tax base.
No, I'll correct you, so don't worry.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I don't necessarily have a problem, but I thought the document was fine, but for the 350 causing some people some concerns. His conclusion, I'm not against his conclusion. If it's added, I wouldn't necessarily have a problem with it. The document as a whole I thought was good, but for the 350.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Steve, I don't know if we're to this point, but I'm looking at the current plan and the land use plan within it. Is that going to be in much the same form in this document, do we anticipate?
We don't know. We're not
Okay.
to that section yet. I'd anticipate probably similar, if not close. The difference is, and we mentioned this briefly, is there's a population matrix that allocates land use and a multiplier. And I think we all recognize that may work for residential, but it probably is not a good predictor of commercial or industrial future land use needs. So I would imagine maybe that might change in that chapter on, how do we get to our land use allocation? And clearly the way the format's kind of shaken out here is there'd be an EDA chapter that we bounce off of that, and then when we get to land use, we'll figure out exactly how many acres when we map it.
Right. I was just thinking about the location of content. Those numbers and tables did jump out at me, but also that the land use plan is full of, these policies, which are essentially recommendations like these.
Yeah, there'll be policies, assuming similar, but there'll be acreages identified in some kind of chart that's very similar to the population matrix. We may use that for residential and then use these other allocations or have a chart on how much commercial we need or multifamily or in office, for example. And then everything dominoes down to the map when it's all said and done.
So I have a question. If, as Mr. Shine says, that recommendations are not appropriate here because they're already in the goals and objectives, the other sections of the comp plan, do they have recommendations, or are all the recommendations in goals and objectives?
That was what I was about to
Yeah,
ask.
so our plan is mostly goals and objectives in the front. It's documentations, chapters 2, 3, and 4. And then chapter 5 is, there's really not even recommendations. There are more policy directives as well as the acreages and the maps are there. Our plan really doesn't have a ton of recommendations until you get to the implementation schedule. But there are conference plans out there that they build recommendations chapter by chapter that flow through the document to end up in the implementation chapter. It's at the end. So for example, let's say one of the things in our community facilities that we need to add 2 new police stations. You clearly could have a recommendation in chapter 3 that ends up manifesting itself in the implementation schedule in the back of the plan. But currently our plan does not have a ton of recommendations chapter by chapter by chapter.
So what is the difference between a policy directive and a recommendation?
So these recommendations, they're very similar actually. Some communities, they would call them goals and objectives and action items. So whether they're a recommendation, an action item, or a policy. But in the land use plan, the policies are really land use policies broke down by the land use districts to give a developer clear guidance on what they have to achieve to move forward. The recommendations in these other chapters are more kind of broad community objectives that you know, because you could think there could be things in the conference plan that don't end up in chapter 5. Again, like let's say the schools, you know, we see a need for something to do with school or parks and rec. Those don't always end up on your land use map, but they're somewhere in your plan. And our plan typically is an inventory based kind of, especially with parks and rec, as opposed to here's where we're going for the future. So then how do you word those? Do they become recommendations? Do they become action items?
So it sounds more like instead of these being recommendations, we need to reconfigure them into the way that everything else is kind of set up with a goal and an objective. So if the goal is to create proactive planning, then we need to have some objectives listed in some way. I don't know. In agreement with kind of what the question is, if we're not recommending things in other chapters, why this one?
Well, the goals and objectives are broader, typically in the beginning of your plan.
Yeah.
They're adopted by the local governments. Then the individual elements, really the statute doesn't tell us anything. They can be however y'all want them. There's no guidance how we have to write these chapters. There's just guidance on which chapters we have to have in general by topic. For example, you have to have a transportation chapter. But how you put things in that transportation chapter, how you word them, whether you call them sub-goals or action items or recommendations, but the broad goals and objectives, everything ought to flow underneath those. But, you know, some of these are pretty specific to be a objective up in chapter 1, I would think.
Right.
They're more specific to this chapter. So again, there's really no right or wrong way to do these, and comprehensive plans do them all, every kind of way.
So in answer to your question, sorry, I'm just going to beat the horse, but sorry, wrong county to say that, I guess. So it's not that I'm necessarily opposed to recommendations. It's also the fact that much of the stuff that is in here is redundant. And I'll even go straight to the point. I actually find it a little insulting that there's a paragraph in here that tells the Planning Commission not to forget to pre-plan. That's what we do. That's what the document does. And it seems like we don't want that in a document. And so I found my notes, and I basically, you know, on the recommendation to take advantage of proactive planning, don't need it. It's just too many words. We spent a lot of time 10 years ago taking our comprehensive plan from this big to this big, and people liked it.
Yeah.
And so I'm cognizant of the fact that streamlined is better. That's partly what's driving me. The idea of identifying suitable land for industrial and economic development, there's a whole paragraph. I don't disagree with anything in it. That's in the goals and objectives. That's what we do. The idea about recommending to ensure meet specific criteria, those are in the goals and objective. The whole paragraph on opt for option agreements over outright purchases. That's not really our job. I wrote down that would seem to be the jobs of mayors, judges, and councils, the court, or an EDA policy, and assisting mayors, not in the comprehensive plan. So It's those things, not that I'm opposed to recommendations or policies per se. I'm just gonna say, these don't seem to be needed.
Right. And to your point, I guess if they're in other places in the document, that's fine. It's just when we throw a lot of words around about, action items, recommendations, policy directives, and they all kind of mean the same thing. And it's like, well, what sections get the policy directives and which don't? And so it'd be good to have everybody on the same page on that, at least. But
Well, if it's a comprehensive plan, the idea is that it's a boundary that we've set up, and within, like, that way we can streamline everything. So if this isn't achieving that, if it's not fitting in with everything else that we've done, then I feel like we should cut that part, personally. I don't know,
well, and if it's redundant,
Yeah.
maybe somewhere else, yeah.
yeah. And you could call it back to, like, if you're gonna write it in here, call it back to as seen in chapter da-da-da on this page, or whatever, you know what I'm saying? Like, if they're questioning where something is, like in the conclusion that Rich wrote, they could call it back to a different spot in the document, but I agree. I feel like this is kind of set up like it's wonderful and it has amazing information, but in regards to how it fits in with the rest of the plan, I think the conclusion paragraph is sufficient, because I don't feel like the recommendations are needed in this specific, in what we're trying to build, this document. And I do agree with cutting text, shortening.
And I'll just say, Lucas Witt couldn't be here, his firm, and then through the EDA wrote the big chunk of this chapter. They've got a medical kind of emergency happening there, so he couldn't be here. There are members of the EDA board here that wanted to be here, and I don't know how, I'll defer to our chair, but, it's your all's group to talk through this, but if you want to make this more broader discussion, these members were here, maybe they could explain to you what the board's position on some of those issues were, why they thought they need to include certain provisions or not. But again, at the end of the day, I think you all make these chapters yours, and to your point, they sort of got to flow with the document, and the document has a certain style to it already, and we're not really changing the whole document. It's more of an update. And again, there's no wrong or right way on any of these. I've actually seen every version of this out there. I've seen where the goals and objectives aren't in one, they're in the individual chapters, and chapter 2 has a goal, and for Parks and Rec, and they just domino different ways through the document. But at the end of the day, I think everyone agrees they're just going to need for some additional acreage. What we hope to do in the future is bring you the zoning map. Ask Kenneth to do something, and just a lot else going on these last couple weeks. But I was going to show you how much industrial land's currently in the city that's vacant, and then how much land use is programmed that also is vacant, to show you kind of what's used. So funny enough, the industrial land that's zoned, that's vacant right now, I think there's a 4-acre tract and a 7-acre tract, and that's about it in the city. The 150 acres is under contract, but something could change and that could free up. But right now, land that's actually zoned industrial in the city of Versailles, I think we're less than 20 acres that's available to be developed. Everything else has currently got a building on it, or is, there may be some vacant buildings, but as far as new land out there, I think we're less than 20 acres. Then the land that actually has land use on it is probably in the hundreds of acres, but you're right back down underneath it. What actually could be developed, it's a small number. So everything's heading towards, at some point when you get to the land use map, somewhere in the community we've got to figure out a footprint where these land uses can go. And so that's probably why some of this was written that way, is because it's going to be hard when we talk about the urban service boundary and reprogramming land use, and maybe the thought was some of this just, kind of makes that a little easier jump from a chapter to the map, is what I'm guessing.
For what it's worth, I think it's a huge accomplishment to have, as you all have echoed. I think it's a big accomplishment to have an economic development chapter in here no matter what. I think what Rich has written up is just a very succinct summary of what follows after, frankly. I just see it as, this is a 2-minute and 20-second Beatles song, and this is a 18-minute Led Zeppelin song. and if you want to make it more digestible for the average citizen of Woodford County to read these things,
Yeah.
I think you go with the Beatles version. I'm more of a Beatles fan than a Zeppelin fan personally. So just for what it's worth, I think it's a big accomplishment no matter what. And I don't think it's a huge difference either way, but it's just more succinct.
I like some of the lyrics in the longer version. I understand it, and I know we have to get to, not a fan of either one of those artists. Anyways, I know.
And this is where I come in with the repeated refrain.
I'm just looking. I'm on page 2. Just for example, under long-term economic stability, some of the language, and there's been a lot of talk about redundancy. I bill by the hour to make a living, and 20 pages is not. I mean, okay, maybe it could be confined here and there. I've never written a document that could not be reduced, but I'm looking under long-term economic stability. I'm looking at some of the language that Rich wants out. By attracting businesses and industries offering sustainable growth prospects, communities can weather economic downturns while maintaining essential public services. And then it goes on. I don't, okay, even if it's redundant, I don't have a problem with that language. If you go down to the next paragraph, a growing tax base is crucial to a community's economic resilience and sustainability. And the next sentence, I don't have a problem. I don't see those as being problematic. But again, every document I guess could be scaled down. I've gotten a little bit better after doing what I do for 20 years of getting ideas a little bit more succinct. But having said that, any of our EDA members or anybody in the public that's here tonight would care to have any questions or make any statements?
I have a question.
You want to come up to the podium?
Sure.
Turn that mic on.
Oh, I don't know how to do that. I'm pretty loud, Steve. I don't need a mic. I'm Maria Bohannon.
Russ, you're on.
I know. I'm Maria Bohannon. I'm on the EDA. I wanted to ask a question. When this is pulled for the audience, it's like for the public to see. Can you dissect each chapter? Can you just click on a chapter and just pull the EDA chapter, or do you have to read the entire
That's a good
report? My question for that is that I'm concerned that if we don't put let's call it a Led Zeppelin Beatle remix, and if we don't do something that has it in there, I'm afraid businesses are going to look at the comprehensive plan, look at the EDA chapter, and not take any other steps. So that's a big concern that I have. So I appreciate you all letting us write this. Lucas's firm really did the lion's share, and they did a great job. But that's one of the things I do have a concern about, is that who's the audience for this? I know it's the public. I know we want them to consume it too. But it's our job to make sure that everybody because we have wonderful services and wonderful facilities in our county, it's our job to help make sure that those things can maintain and grow if need be. So, and we do that through industry and payroll tax. That's the lion's share of it. So that's what we're here for. Do y'all have any questions for me? I might not be able to answer them. Lucas did this, but I can take it back. All right. Then I'm out. Mic drop.
I think it's a good point. I'm not sure how the document will, right now the current plan is one long PDF. Mm-hmm. You read through the entire document. It can be individual chapters. We talked about this being a more web-friendly document going forward.
Yeah. That'd be really helpful.
So you could hit individual chapters, but as you just heard, someone could just click on the chapter and they don't see the other chapter and how all these things balance from chapter 1 to land use. Then it sort of lends itself back to why you might load more into one chapter, so you can kind of see the whole picture in that one chapter. But if you start at chapter 1, you read the goals and objectives, you start to then it
Well,
makes sense.
You could hot link the goals
Yeah.
and you could
Back
hot
to-
link
That's
the
what I
goals
was
and
gonna
objectives,
say.
hot link the goals and
right.
objectives to this.
That's right.
Right? Because I take your point that people don't always look at the whole thing. On the other hand, when we do, I'm gonna defer to Henry here, but I think when we do most of the things, when he's always correcting us to make sure that we do the right thing in our motions, he's always making sure that we abide by the goals and objectives. Is that right? Generally speaking?
I think that's often because they are the source of the recommendations. I think that it's maybe would take a little more work to use other chapters as a justification.
Right. So people are coming forward are gonna need to know those goals and objectives, so hot link them to the beginning here. They're there.
Absolutely.
If you don't mind, I'm Dr. Paul Schreffler. I'm on the EDA, and I think I spoke to you before briefly, but certainly, again, this is my own personal opinion because this hasn't been vetted through the EDA board, my statement today, but since Lucas is not here and unable to be here, I think it's very apt that, we are not objecting to any kind of edits for brevity and clarity, I think that's always a good thing to do. But when I see a whole section redlined, it raises questions in my mind. And I understand what your perspective is, and I respect that greatly, because it is important. But this was also then written as a public document because it's new, right? People don't know what economic development is or why. So that's why it was structured. And here's what it is. Here's why we're doing this. And here is our recommendations, because I would expect as a separate body, we would make recommendations to you all. It's your decision. But then the recommendations are based on the data that we presented, just like it's not just 350 acres, which is really just replacement. We sold 340 in the last 5 years, right? So that's very conservative in my mind, right? And you say, as you say, it may need to be more, and we may need to edit that piece of it. But it also, in that same paragraph, says why, and 70 plus acres, because that's what the data tells us. So those granular details in the recommendations are there for a purpose, as well as the structure of the document being, to sell this idea and the reason for economic development, and we all know why, right, in this room, but outside this room, there's a lot of people that don't understand why. Why do we need land for economic development? Why do we need land for jobs in our community? So that's really why this is in that structure. But I think editing granularly is good, but I think the recommendations should stand mostly. We can argue about the number, or we can negotiate about the number, but I think it needs to be stated as a recommendation from a body of experts to this panel as to what we recommend you all consider, and then it is your decision, and we'll live and work within that decision. So,
I disagree with you. Personally, I don't think that it's the EDA's job to be making recommendations to the community through the comprehensive plan. I think it's absolutely your job to come to the table publicly as the people who know the most about workforce development and make those arguments in the public forum. But a lot of people have other ideas as well, and they don't get to have that voice in here, that you get that voice. And I'm not sure why the EDA gets that voice.
And the current statement is
we
like.
don't let the realtors
Yeah.
write the regs about how many houses we're gonna build.
Right. And the way
Even
it's
though
currently
in the best
written,
interest perhaps to build houses in the
realtors are
county.
commercial. We're a public body. So.
Yeah,
Well-
maybe we just need to go out and have a discussion offline here,
Yeah, okay.
but you personally have come to us and talked about a fundamental absolute need to see land as inventory, and I fundamentally disagree with that position.
I think right now too, it being listed as a recommendation for Woodford County, it's not the planning and zoning. And it's not this committee, it's not the comprehensive plan's recommendations, it's just coming from the EDA. So if it's the EDA's recommendations, then I feel like that should be listed somewhere else. I don't feel like it's a part of this because this didn't come from us making these recommendations, if that makes sense, what I'm trying to say.
It does, but I think that stepping back a little bit, if we hired a consultant and they wrote the whole plan, it's
Sure.
kind of it's their idea, but eventually you all put your stamp on and say, this is what we want.
Right.
You may reject half their draft and say, we just don't agree with where you went. So it's not unusual to have groups in your community come in, like, for example, we've got the Parks and Rec, we would naturally want to ask them what should go. We asked the Versailles Police Department what should be in their paragraph, because obviously we're not the experts in
Right.
law enforcement. So it's not unusual that groups in your community help contribute to the plan and maybe even write some sections.
I'm not disagreeing with
But
that.
at the end of the
It's
day,
the
you guys-
recommendation piece.
Yeah,
It's that we're making,
I agree with that too, don't get me wrong, you know, I think.
Yeah.
that
You guys make
this
the
is,
call.
this is wonderful, that, we need this in here. I think that's just the
Yeah.
difference.
Can I ask another question? Would it be a problem and listen, I used to write regs for the state, so I'm all about brevity. I get it, redundancy. But again, I always concern myself of who's your audience and who's gonna read this. And we're not the audience. You all are the initial right now, but we're putting it out. So we're not the audience. We already know all this kind of stuff. So we gotta look at who's gonna look at this. The public, industry, that kind of thing. What would be the problem with keeping Mr. Shine's conclusion and then putting some of the recommendations, not per se as a recommendation, but bullet points to enhance this? Because this reads to me like a mission statement, and these are the goals that you would do to make that mission statement possible. I think that could be a very good remix and give everybody, I think, what they need, and every audience member, regardless of where they come from, could follow that. And then you could hyperlink at the bottom for more goals and what have you go to the front. I think it kind of capsulizes what we're trying to accomplish with also trying to keep the integrity of what you all are trying to accomplish. That's just a thought. Thank you again.
Yes, so as far as going forward, and we've heard a lot of good comments tonight. I think there's a lot of people have different opinions about this chapter. A lot of people have made those opinions known. As far as going forward, I think we're going to have some consensus on where to go from here. Because obviously this is very important, but we've got other chapters to address to get through this project. It's been going on how long, Mr. Hunter?
We're past 2 years.
Okay.
We got one chapter done, though.
Perhaps everybody's learned a lesson about picking their next chair for this committee to speed things along. But we've got to, I think we've got to have a consensus at this point, and procedurally, I've made my opinion known, but I'm only one vote on this committee. That I think then it goes to the full commission. Good.
Yeah, eventually, the full planning commission ratifies all these individual chapter elements.
So if there's a consensus for Mr. Shine's edited version to go forward, then we need to put that vote forward. If that's not the consensus, then the vote will obviously speak for itself. But Steve, as far as, I think we're going to have a vote on this, and then go forward on the next ones, because I think our goal was to have 2 or 3 chapters and then have some public meetings out in the community.
And then bring them back for.
So, and Henry, I may have, as far as voting on getting a consensus on this one, procedurally, can we have a vote of so there's the 4 commission members on this committee, and the Patty's, the ex officio members. How do we just take a vote on the subcommittee members here?
I'm going to the bylaws to see if they
Okay.
instruct about that.
The bylaws reference the committee, and I believe there's 4 members on the committee, and the chair participates in all committees at her
While
discretion.
Henry's looking, I'd just like to respond to the comment about, I agree with you completely. I mean, I think that, I say this almost about every third planning commission, I say this about I think one of the hallmarks of this iteration is our sensitivity to trying to make this a more accessible body for the general public and just make it clear what we do. So I take your point, and I think it's a good point. I don't know how we vote on that or where it fits in the end results. I'm not ready to give up and put all the stuff at the end that I took in person back out there, but like Chad, I'm one person. And I take your point, and I feel like maybe a hot link to the goals and objectives might do it. People are more used to reading that way these days anyway.
Right.
But
And I would add, we've heard from two members of the EDA, and I think as a community, we've got to have some growth to sustain ourselves, and we've already got the housing coming. We've already approved the housing coming, so and we've already been through the process of those hearings on these new developments that are coming, and we're going to have, and I know Rich hates the term tax base, or I presume you were uncomfortable when we had the previous discussions, but we're going to have the tax base there, and the EDA, part of their role, unless I'm confused, is to encourage and facilitate some growth in this community. That's what their purpose is, or at least one of their purposes. But I'm one person and one vote. Do we have, so as far as the bylaws go?
So as to votes, the bylaws don't speak to it too much. They talk about the membership of the committees. I think it might be cleanest to have the planning commissioners be the ones who vote, since the legislative bodies are going to get a bite at this apple later. It's just my suggestion. Right.
Well, let me clarify that. I didn't think the legislative bodies vote on the objectives. Yeah, we've already got that behind us. We've already done that. So it's an interesting issue. I've worked on plans where the legislative body asked to look at the whole document when it was done, even though the planning commission, the statute, I believe, says they passed the elements in the map, let's say. But then I've had the government say, we'd like to look at the map and make sure we're satisfied with it. And they did ratify it kind of all together. I've had others where they're split different. So I'm not sure, but I guess for as far as this committee goes, it would be the 4 members, you think, would vote, or would the chair, since she serves on these committees also, is she part of the, or do we have 5 people voting or 4, would you say, on this committee when we actually?
yeah, that's what we're after.
Yeah.
I think that the subcommittee chair would break the tie, but
Yeah. Okay.
4, and then Mr. Wells if needed.
Yeah. So
He is one of the 4.
Yeah.
he's one of the 4.
Counting you as one of the 4.
But I think the bylaws are that the chairperson of the full commission is a
The tie,
standing.
yeah.
Standing
The
member of
tiebreaker,
all
basically.
committees.
Yeah.
No, standing member of all committees. So we have several committees.
Right.
And there's chairs and there's members, but then the planning commission chair, the chair, participates in all committees as they choose. And so is a standing member on all committees.
Including the vote.
Mr. Chair, point of order.
Yes.
So I would recommend that prior to any vote be taken, that the voting membership is clarified by vote, and that quorum is also clarified by vote. Mr. Counsel, would you agree?
So with regard to your point of order, my understanding of the bylaws, the five members, and I'm not looking at the bylaws, but the 5 members here on this committee, which includes Ms. Perry as chairwoman of the full commission. That's
Right.
okay. I mean, that's my understanding. Am I incorrect?
I think based on the way that it talks about the other committees, that's a sound understanding. For Comp Plan Review Committee, it does not say who the members are. It doesn't speak to elected official participants. I think that's why it's wise to take a vote on clarifying who the membership is, because there's not much guidance on that.
Okay. So procedurally, I need to make a motion that the 5 members of this committee, as was elected, and they didn't change at the beginning of this year, so I think this committee was elected at the beginning of 24.
When re-elected
Yeah.
Re-elected.
this year.
So it would be the 5 subcommittee members that are here tonight.
Right.
All right, so I need to put that, I'll make the motion that, for clarification, that would be the voting members on this chapter going forward.
Right.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor of the motion on clarification, say aye. Aye. All opposed?
And other thing I was just going to mention, I've been involved in steering committees of comprehensive plans where there was a tricky chapter similar to this, and there's one scenario where they went through paragraph by paragraph and voted on, are we okay with the edits in paragraph on blah, blah, blah. And now what about the next one? Well, as opposed to, are we comfortable with all Rich's edits
Right.
across the board and whatnot, so I've done them both ways or been part of committees that did that. Literally just went through every one and said, okay, what do we think about the changes on page 1? And are we good? Okay, what about page 2? And it was chapters that were very similar to this. There was just a debate on the wording of the chapters. Or you guys could probably say, look, you got a draft in front of you with edits. Who's good with that version versus the original version? Or a different version, I guess.
So we can go through page by page. I mean, or we can take the whole thing.
It's really, there's front section and back section,
Yeah.
funny enough.
Yeah.
And that's about it, yeah.
Okay, yeah, so the edits starting on page 1, go through it, and I've never looked at this document with the edits in this fashion, separated. So the edits on page, go to from page 1 to page 2. That's what, Steve, you've called the front section.
Yep.
of edits.
Yep.
Okay. So I guess we'll take that first.
Okay.
So, in looking at page 1 and 2, Mr. Shine's made some edits to those pages. Well, I don't think we need to go through paragraph by paragraph unless one or more committee members want to. So, basically, we need I think the committee's heard my opinion with regard to this document. But if somebody wants to make a motion on the first part of the edits from this chapter, then so be it.
I'll make a motion to accept the changes that Mr. Shine has submitted for pages 1 and 2 of the economic development section.
Any discussion? All in favor of the edits of the motion for the edits on pages 1 and 2 of Mr. Shine's draft edits for this chapter, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Nay.
Mr. Chair, I don't think this affects that vote, but I think Ms. O'Reilly is over there pointing out that there is, at the end of the paragraph, something that says that the chair can attend meetings but is not a member. Is that right? So amendment to what we established earlier, 4, not 5.
Okay, so I think that vote, instead of being 4-1, is now 3-1. Okay.
Okay.
Mr. Shine, I'm not seeing any edits
There's
on
nothing,
till
there's
17,
nothing in the body until the conclusion.
page 7.
The
Okay.
body's great.
So, the second part of Mr. Shine's edits with regard to this chapter started on page 17. The conclusion in red is the first, and then the language after that. There's multiple, well, it's pretty much deleted after that. Is anyone prepared to make a motion on this second part of the edits from Mr. Shine on this chapter?
Can it be made with an amendment? Or are we only voting on exactly
It's
what's
not been
being?
made yet, so there's
Right.
no need for an amendment.
Oh, I meant like if accepting it, but with possible bullet points as discussed previously.
Make the motion and then we can discuss it.
Yeah. I don't know yet. I'm still thinking. I'm sorry. I was asking a question.
So, I mean, that's a really interesting point.
Yeah.
The problem is, how do you vote on something that
That's-
you're gonna write later?
That's what I'm saying. That's what I don't really know.
So you turn it down and say, you send it back for revision,
Yeah.
basically, if that's what you're proposing. I mean, that's not an amendment, I know, but that's what you're proposing.
Yes.
No. Yeah.
Well, I think there'd be a way, for example, to say, you know, let's keep the conclusion, keep the rest struck, but we're going to keep recommendation. I'll just pick a random number 1. You know, we're going to.
I don't think there's any one full paragraph that we want to keep, but I see what you're saying, if you wanted
Yeah.
to add a few bullets from
Yeah.
each, you know.
Yeah.
Similar to what he did in the beginning with reducing the amount of information that's provided in each of those bullet points. If we can do that again, basically. Just reducing the text.
I think that's a good middle ground to at least get us moving forward, since no one's agreeing on
Yeah.
Yeah,
one or the other.
I'm having a hard time imagining what they would be, because I don't want
Yeah.
bullets that reproduces stuff that's been struck. I take the point that the bullets might be useful for informing the general public about what our goals and objectives are.
Yes.
Doesn't deny that I still think these.
That it's redundant.
these are
Redundant, yeah.
And sometimes inappropriate. I'm just gonna stick with that, but you can go with that. As Chad said, I'm just one. I'm the other one.
So is anybody,
No.
just trying to move us along here at this point. Anybody prepared to make a motion on these part 2 of the edits?
I do agree with the redundancy, giving the goals and objectives and looking at the document as a whole. But I'm open if you.
You're allowed to ask the elected officials what their opinions are on this?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, it seems to me it's gonna land on their laps, so.
Well, Mr. Chair, I talked a lot last meeting, so I'm not trying to talk a lot this meeting. But I would reiterate the points that I emphasized. The current economic development success that we've achieved in Woodford County is under the current comprehensive plan, which does not include recommendations like this. In fact, it does not identify specific properties in the land use map, nor does it say we need to identify, for example, 350 acres of land or significant land. I think that the public, the consensus, the majority consensus in Woodford County is not that we identify specific agricultural land to develop into industrial land. I don't think that the majority of the community thinks we need to do significant industrial development. I think that Woodford Countyans want to see strategic industrial development. And that is reflected in that conclusion that Rich succinctly put. I really appreciate all the EDA is doing, but economic development would work through the EDA and us as elected officials. And I believe that our success is not dependent upon it saying that we have to identify these things or we have to do certain things. That's my opinion. I think that we're struggling with the increase in development of agricultural land, and that's one of our clear goals and objectives, and I think we need to continue to prioritize that at the very top of what we're doing. That's my 2 cents.
And I'm in general agreement, mostly because of my constituency. I'm just thinking about what would they want to see in this document. And I believe the voters of Midway on the whole would rather see, if they could sit here and tell me how I should weigh in here, they would rather I weigh in on the side of the Beatles opposed to Led Zeppelin here. They're both good. I don't think we would lose a ton either way. I think we don't lose anything with Rich's conclusion in red, personally. And I think it just fits more with what Midway would want right now, frankly, for this next 5-year, or however long this document will exist in its current form.
And I will echo both of them as well. I think, and I don't probably speak for everybody in Versailles, but I think I speak for many people that we would like to see strategic growth versus just, greenfield after greenfield taken for, whatever, but looking at, infill or repurposing existing industrial properties if possible, but, taking maybe a scalpel to it versus more of the sledgehammer approach.
Okay.
One thing for clarification, and I'm not, in preparing for tonight, I did not focus on the old plan. I thought there was some recommendation on acreage passed.
There is in chapter 5.
Okay. And so we've had a number in there before.
Yeah, it's a population-based matrix of 125% or 200% based on population growth over the census period. So it just allocates acres per live body from, a point in the census to the future point, and it says here's how many acres per person we need. There's no relationship there.
To anything.
To anything, yeah.
To anything. It's just
And
random out of the air.
So there is an acreage, but it's not very effective in chapter 5. It works better for residential. And then there's land use programmed in the urban service boundaries of a particular acreage, both in Midway and in Versailles.
Anyone prepared to
I'll move that. Go ahead. It's time to go.
I'll move that we accept the revisions to the final 4 pages of this chapter.
Is there a motion, there's a motion on the floor, is there a second?
Seconded.
Any discussion at this point? All in favor to accept the second part of the edits, starting on page 17 of the chapter, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Nay. Motion passes. So at this point, now that we have a consensus on this, it'll go to the full commission at this point?
No, so it would, at this point, it's a draft article that we'll just put in the can with the other drafts, and we'll format it up like the rest of the chapters. And at some point, we will have a road show where we're going to go out to the public and take all these articles out and present them to the public just for comments. Once that's done, we'll come back to this committee and take whatever comments we get and let you all read the comments and there may be other changes you need to make once the public touch this document. And then at that point, it would go to the planning commission once we get through that step. So it's coming back here after we go out to the public.
So moving on, I mean, we've been at it for about an hour. Steve, do you want to address the housing?
Yeah, we'll go real fast. We'll jump past this. The goal is to stay at an hour here. The housing RFP is pretty much done. I did reach out to some different consultants. We talked about writing a housing chapter. Everyone I talked to said they're anxious to submit something. The goal would be to jump off the housing study that was done in 2022 and write a more concise chapter. We'll just, instead of the word recommendations, right, there would probably be targets. I think there would be targets in that chapter that we'd want to achieve for housing initiatives in the community. And that's actually how one of the consultants described how their product usually lands. They put targets in there that, for example, what type of housing types we would want or income levels. So the idea is to do a chapter of that nature next, and it would probably take some time. We'd be putting this out for bid. So I guess the next meeting we could bring you the RFP. I didn't think we'd get to that point. I could bring you the draft RFP or email it out to everybody.
Email it to us.
And you guys can look at it and
Yeah.
see if it meets the needs you guys would hope would be in the housing chapter. But there's a lot of interest in providing a chapter like that for us again, we would not be writing this in-house. That's not my expertise.
So you already have something,
A general RFP has been put
Okay.
together, yeah, that just basically says, here's the type of product we'd like someone to deliver for us.
okay.
And so that's all I have on that.
Can we, is there a way that we can, Patty, or Chad, I guess, is there a way that if that's written, that we could not wait till the next meeting to do this?
Right, I was gonna say, can we just get
approve
it
this
and
by
then?
email, or can we approve this from a vote, or can we do that?
I mean,
Just to get things moving.
our esteemed counselor, do we need to, for a request for proposal, can the committee do that?
Maybe like a motion of conditional approval, subject to people signing off by email.
Okay.
Send.
does it need to go in front of the full commission? As opposed to?
Yeah, funny enough, the RFP might, because we'd be bidding this out, we need to talk about some money and some
Oh,
issues like that.
okay.
So it might be something we bring to the commission, the housing RFP, to contract that out.
Okay.
The full planning commission would actually give us authority to probably, I'm not sure to put the RFP out is an issue, but obviously to
Spending the
accept
money,
it,
right.
spend the
Yeah.
money and accept a client, we would need the planning commission to do that.
Okay, what about this, if there's a consensus on this? I think if you email the committee members, just the committee members, the RFP, and then, I don't know, you probably won't have that back for the May 8th, but is that, or do you think you could have?
Oh, yeah.
Like you could have responses to the RFP? by
I
May?
won't have responses back, but I would have the draft to you all, and if you all say it's good, we could formalize it, the next plan commission authorize us to submit it out for consideration.
Well, let's do that if that's the consensus. If you want to email it to.
Yeah.
To all the commissioners, I guess, and then it's on the agenda, then we can approve it on the 8th, and then it can go out at that point.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah, at this point, we really have no funds allocated in the budget for our housing chapter. We have a little bit of money for the comp plan. We've talked with the mayor a little bit about the need for a chapter of this style, Mayor Harrod Versailles. We don't even know what we're looking at for a quote. You know, if we put this out, someone comes back and says, well, that'd be $45,000. That's a problem for us.
And where does the one that Allison Davis did a couple of years ago, in terms of the format of the kind of thing?
It's broad, and it has some good recommendations, but
It's the sort of thing that-
it's not narrowly focused to push us to what we would probably want to land in Chapter 5 on the map. And I don't remember what the community paid
Just
for
thinking
that
about it,
study.
is there a head start if some of the?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just a head start is all I'm thinking.
Yeah, and that's one of the groups I've reached out. I've reached out to several folks, and that is one of the groups that said they'd be interested,
Yeah, okay.
and they already did that initiative. But I don't know what the community spent on that study, but I don't think it was cheap.
10 to 15 maybe?
10 to 15.
I'll check.
And it was more a general study about commuter patterns and
Yeah, I'll check.
needs, yeah.
Okay, unless there's anybody that has a problem with that, that's the way
Okay,
we'll go.
sounds good.
And then, future meeting dates,
Just, obviously, we're kind of on hold, whatever you guys want, we'll get this.
When is the
RFP
next
started.
commission meeting?
May 8th.
That is May 8th? Oh,
Yeah.
wow, okay.
we won't be prepared to
Seems like
meet
it come
before
around every
that.
4 weeks or so.
Before that, I'm assuming, so.
No.
We can talk about that at that point.
Yeah.
Is that it? Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? Anybody opposed? I don't think so.
Time for supper.